All right, so we need you to wrap up your planning. We're going to start calling people up to report out. All right, we are at time. We know people need to be out of here on time, so let's get started. Do we have any volunteers for who wants to report out first? Table 6. All right, come on up. Want to make sure we can get you on camera. Want to make sure we can get you on camera.
Good. I didn't know I was on camera. Yeah. Well, I don't think we needed any more people when we had at our table to do this today. But here we go. The messaging today was focused on adults, or the message, talking about messaging focused on adults. I think we agreed at our table we need to expand that messaging to focus on other groups too, older adults, in particular people with individuals, in our test messaging, etc. We talked about expanding, addressing the data gap by going beyond EMFORS data and looking at other housing data, characteristics of occupants, data from epidemiology, community, others, and just beyond the EMFORS data alone. We looked at standardization. We talked about standardization of smoke alarm equipment, the batteries, things we mentioned earlier in discussions, having the same base, same communication protocols, manufacturing users manuals, saying different things or saying things different than the rest of the community, fire service community is saying. Testing smoke alarms. How do we test smoke detectors, chambers, date to replace, being visible on the alarm? How do we get people to do that? And have a clearinghouse of information about manufacturing dates. What is the date, for instance, to take down that 10-year-old, the day of installation 10 years out, or manufacturing date? Things of this nature need to be clarified in messaging. We need smoke alarm installation project administrative tools to be somewhat, we need to emphasize that, making sure people who are doing smoke alarm installation projects keep a good inventory, train their people appropriately, select their proper equipment, have installation protocols, keep records in particular. We mentioned the scenario that occurred in Atlanta a few years ago when, 10,000 something alarms went in that they found out later on were bad. Fortunately, apparently they had their records of those where they went. Otherwise, that would have been a much more difficult scenario than I'm sure it was anyways. But I know Vision 2020 has done a lot in focusing on home visits. This kind of covers what happens after the home visit in that sense, but getting some standard procedures there. Focus on new construction, modernize interconnected alarms in all new construction. Doing a cost-benefit analysis of, it calculates and considers the staff cost of home visits, not just the cost of the smoke alarms alone. We also mentioned in a very hurried manner at the end there, the number of alarms in placement is 1 in 3 homes better than 3 in 1 home. I think we kind of talked about that earlier, too. And lastly, well, not quite, people fight fires, from Marty's report. What is this about? We were kind of stunned to hear that. And why do people don't want to call the fire department? Somebody mentioned earlier that there seems to be a reluctance to call the fire department. And I heard someone mentioning at the table they went down to the dump a few weeks earlier and saw someone dragging a burnt mattress out of the back of a truck that they had apparently ripped out of a house that had been on fire. So people are fighting fires, and we were wondering who's doing that from a demographics perspective. I thought in Maine, for instance, we knew that older adults, particularly involved in a kitchen fire, had a proclivity to want to put that fire out. Lastly, we've heard a lot today, got a lot of information, and someone demanded at our table that we get a clearinghouse of best technologies so smoke alarm selection is easier to discern, and better equipment such as smart dual sensors that are available now, that everyone knows that through this clearinghouse. So.
All right, who's the next volunteer? Wonderful.
Okay. Gosh, we had so much time to think. I think we were just talking for a little while because we had finished our topics. But no, I'm just kidding. But we tried to pull together what we could in that short period of time. So first off, just to start with the data and what to do there, our thoughts were pull resources of small groups of departments. So some of the ones in LA County or whatever departments are out there doing this now to try to make, to look at their successes for smoke alarm data, so specifically to smoke alarm data and the collection of that. We need to get changes to MFERS using modern computer technology. That may end up being, depending on the powers that be, how long that will take, may be more of our long-term goal, but that definitely needs to be started now. On the human behavior side, time for firefighters to interact with the public. And it doesn't always have to be firefighters. It could be in Tucson, we're working with a nonprofit organization to go into the homes and collect some of the data on human behavior and how we can make changes to that. Materials for schools and kids to get the message out. Again, another thing that we're actually doing in Tucson is we reach third graders. I'm sure many people go out to the school-age children, teach fire safety skills, but we actually have 100% return rate on making those kids go home, test their smoke alarms, do they have an escape plan, and now bringing it back to the school. So we have 100% return rate on that. So that's just another great information and data collection for us. So again, making good messaging there. As far as technology, materials to address the needs of the communities, not one size fits all. So yes, we have our codes, our minimum standard, but we need to make sure that all the needs in that community, no matter what the socioeconomic or socioeconomic is, make sure that we can meet the needs of that community and target where we actually need to go into to find results. Easy to deliver and cost effective. And then when it comes to policy and enforcement, we need to find time for fire departments to get the word out. And again, like I mentioned before, get other community groups involved in that as well. And I'm sure I missed a few things because we had all kinds of great ideas, but that's all I can deliver to you now.
Be short.
Keep it to 30 minutes, right? We took a different approach. We identified our conversation short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So one of the things that I think will be consistent with all the groups is we wanted to develop a theme, but that theme had to have variables that could reach different socioeconomic or cultures within the community. We were talking about what recently happened with the Orthodox family in New York. And the fire service can't just go into the Orthodox community and start to deliver a message. They have to partner with that Orthodox community, develop the message that's specific to them. And having spent the week with Sal Casano, the former recent commissioner at FDNY, that meeting between the fire service and the Orthodox community was taking place the very following week. So you have to develop your message, such as if you're going to turn on a device, if you're not permitted due to your religious beliefs to turn on a device for a certain period of time, many families turn the device on early. So the religion doesn't prevent them from cooking, it's just turning the device on and off. So maybe the message is more making sure that device is not around combustibles or anything that could ignite, such in that situation. So, and also when you're developing those partners, it could be cultural specific, such as religion, or it could be such as seniors and the daycare and the caregiving that goes out, or using your Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts that go into the community. Someone was talking that the adults actually felt like they were helping teach the children, so that gave more of an acceptance to it. We also need to develop a true, accurate community risk. A lot of times we're looking at our response data. So we're actually basing our responses and our actions to information that's 1, 2, 3 years old. So we're basing our strategies on old information and not current information. And I know there's a couple of projects looking at this, so we could actually start to identify our true current applicable risks within our community. We have to get over this ionization versus photoelectric argument. It is clouding the issue. It's causing paralysis by analysis for many people, and especially the public. And I know this is an argument that is specific to the fire service, and I stand up here as a representative for the fire service saying, we've got to get past this. Our true goal is the community safety, and we have to do that. We talked about enforcement and requiring landlords. We discussed the carrot versus the stick. And if we're going to 1 and 2 family homes, or I should say single family homes, where we're dealing with the homeowner, we can only go in if they invite us, unless we see a true risk happening. So are they going to invite us in if we're going to whack them with a stick and charge them a fee? Or can we take a different approach with the single family owner as opposed to the landlord? Some of the things that we discussed is if a home is for sale and it changes ownership, then you can go on and require the retrofit to meet the current standards. Landlords, when you have a change of tenant, you can go in and develop or demand that they meet the current standards, and then you can bring in that retroactivity. Some of the medium goals that we wanted to make: identify funding. It's great for us to go into homes and start to inspect and do safety visits and do safety analysis, but we need the alarms to be able to install to start to meet this. And whether we want to do it in 1 alarm per floor or meeting the standard, that's going to be a local discussion, but you have to come up with the funding to do that. And to Derek's point, it was brought up over there, we're telling people what they need to do, and we're not listening to the community, because a lot of times when you go into these, especially the really challenged poverty neighborhoods, we may be telling them this is for your safety, but they have hygiene issues such as rodent or insect infestation. They have to make a decision to put food on the table or clothes on their kids so they can go to school or purchase school books. This gets down on the importance list, and so we have to identify what our message is to get it as a priority, and then the program to help deliver it for them. Also, with the NFIRS data, as I'm sure every table is going to come up here and talk about, we really identified the importances on the training of the fire service, how to record the information, but most importantly, why it's important and why it affects the fire service, and that they should be providing this data. And a couple of long-term goals. Number one, sustainability of our efforts. These can't be one-time sweeps through the neighborhood. I think sometimes we get into a challenge where we want to race around and install as many alarms as we can, and we're not taking the time to establish that relationship with that homeowner, give them the true reflection or a safety visit. It's not just about numbers, it's about those relationships and developing that trust and understanding what the message is. Identifying technologies that are both reliable and cost effective, and also identifying the degradation impact on performance. So I think we need to keep this relationship with industry alive and well. And Larry, I disagree with you a little bit, and we talked about it even with the manufacturer. I think we need to push the manufacturers to develop technology. Sometimes it was easier relying on older technology and just refine it, but I think the manufacturers are now out there doing the research to develop and deliver better technology. Thank you.
That's right. We had a lively discussion, and I'll try to synopsis things here as best as possible. Mary Kay said she wanted someone with a different background to give the synopsis, and because of my medical background, she asked me to do it. And then I realized that even I can't even read my own handwriting here, so this may not work so well. But we tried to come up with 3 or 4 broad approaches to eliminating house fire deaths or residential fire deaths. And probably the first, you won't be surprised that our table is heavily weighted toward data. And probably the first and most important is to garner support and execute a new census on fire safety, smoke alarms in America, similar to the CPSC study, which of course is over 20 years ago, and give us a handle for where we are now. Not only how many have a smoke alarm, but quantify those and try to characterize those better. Our second recommendation was to also related to data, to establish a task force to revise the NFIRS data, especially those elements related to the smoke alarm performance, including unwanted alarms or nuisance alarms, and to prepare for the next iteration of NFIRS, and to find fire departments that will test and evaluate the new data elements. And thirdly, we had a lively discussion about engaging every U.S. fire department in conducting targeted home safety visits as the most impactful strategy to eliminate fire deaths. And of course, those need to be targeted because our resources are always limited, as Isaac pointed out several times. And in order to do that, as Derek pointed out, we need national leadership to help direct fire departments, and one idea was trying to tie it to grant funding, for example. And lastly, a late entry, which we didn't have time to discuss much about, but that is research and test effective methods to address the fire problem, the problem of fire deaths among older adults, and building on successful methods that we've had in the past. Thank you.
So our table spent some time evaluating the same kind of methodology that we heard from Table 4, that short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And we unanimously came to the conclusion that we agree with Table 2. For midterm, we decided we agree with Table 4. And short-term, midterm, and long-term are, I think, things that kind of this day encompassed. And we have to kind of be realists, right? So a lot of what we talked about was blue sky during the content of the day. So as we look forward, in the short term, we're dealing with existing technology. We're dealing with existing fire departments and existing nonprofits and other agencies that are trying to collaborate in solving these problems. So in the short term, advocacy seems to be a really important thing because we're trying to encourage people to allow us to help them. Many of them are struggling to put clothes or food on the table, as we've heard from other people, and it's just a very difficult thing to do. So if we can develop a methodology for proper advocacy, On the one hand, that's for the public. On the other hand, training is essential. Proper training for getting into a home and properly installing smoke alarms, properly sharing what the information is to the public, and then taking all of that data and bringing it back into I don't think it necessarily has to be limited to a single database, but it has to be a series of data that's shareable between different organizations in a uniform method. So in the short term, those are the two things that we feel are really, really hugely important. As we look forward into the midterm area, buy-in from fire departments is a really important thing. So if we can encourage fire departments, whether it be through legislation or other types of methodologies. I don't think we need to go into the legal standards of this, but fire departments are very comfortable doing certain kinds of reporting, right? So all fire departments are, for example, very focused on standards of cover. Standards of cover is all about firefighter safety. It's all about understanding what your community's about and all the risks that are out there and how to make that work. How about standards of safety? Coming up with a methodology wherein all fire departments have their own incentive. One of the issues that exists with fire departments is NIH, right? Not invented here. So if you've got fire departments that are eager to be the leader in their area, to be the ones who innovate, if we give them a template that's all about standards of safety, then they can be the inventor of it. They can take the credit for it, but at the same time, it'll follow a policy that works well. And as we look forward into longer term, well, it's going to take a long time to make technology changes and to make legislative changes, but we need to start now. So if we start now, we start pushing that forward, then the longer term result will be innovative technology. And I think if we look at the manufacturers, I think they're gone at this point in time, but if we look at the manufacturers who, well, some of them are gone. I think my point was going to be is that, you know, there's always an opportunity for someone new to come along. And if it's a great opportunity for someone to become an inventor, for someone to come up with an idea that's new and innovative, I think what Nest did is very exciting. It obviously is a niche product to start with, and they're looking at broadening their scope into other areas, but that's only going to spur on the other manufacturers to be competitive and to do other kinds of things. So I think the most important thing, if we look at the technology aspect, is competition. How do we actually push people along, not by forcing them to or not by telling them they have to, but push them on the way that America wants to push things forward, by innovating. We don't innovate enough in this country right now, so let's do it. Thanks.
I stand between you and the door, right? I think I can say that Table 7's in violent agreement with Table 3, to borrow a phrase. No, we ditto for a lot of what's already been said. I mean, we all heard the same things and got a lot of the similar kind of a background schedule. A key point that we batted around for quite some time was continuing, reinforcing, or getting out there with that community risk reduction outreach. That's really important on all kinds of levels, and particularly as we enter an era, or we're still in an era, of budgetary constraints for our fire service as well. To build relationships with the community and people who will call City Hall and say, don't cut the budget, is something that we can do. And I make the same speech to my folks at the fire administration too, that we got to build customer base. And look at it in a marketing situation as well. Some kind of a research program that would look out at the consumers and determine a list, a feature list. What do you want in a smoke alarm? I stood up here and talked about, you know, the smartphones do what we want to do. Well, we haven't really, you know, besides with one notable exception, we haven't done that in the smoke alarm community, and that was proprietary, as it should be in many respects. But to reach out to the community and develop maybe a feature set that manufacturers could then take a look at and see how to blend it together. And if it's even, I mean, we've seen a lot of features show up on smoke alarms on the shelves that are no longer there today, because the investment was made, the products were put on the shelf, and they just didn't sell. And so we don't know really what the people were willing to get, what pay for and go for it. Some better communication from the device to us would be helpful, that we talked about a bit. you know, the temporal T3 tone, it will wake most people up, but if you got the combination CO smoke thing that gives you a T3 tone or a T4 tone, how many people, in the absence of a speaker that says this is a CO alarm or this is a fire alarm, understand that? I mean, I understand it because I'm a geek, and most of you understand it because you've been at the business for a while, but the general population can't tell the difference. They don't know whether to open the window or run. And so moving towards a device where there's a speaker there to communicate and maybe a dip switch on the back that says what language you to pick, because we're a multicultural society today, it would be something that could be helpful. And I obviously the data thing, the NFIRS bid is really important. I can tell you that that's a long-term solution. I think, Marty, you probably lived through NFIRS 5, and that was a 10-year program.
Yeah.
Yeah, so NFIRS 6 would probably be, we're getting better, so it's probably 20. Plus a gob of money from Congress, so perhaps a shorter-term research project targeted at the questions we want answered would be more appropriate, because even after we get the next version of NFIRS that's in some miraculous form asks the questions that we want in a form that we can get reliable answers from the fire service, it's going to be another 5 or 10 years before we get a data set that we can analyze. So I'll be gone. Many of the people in this room will be moved on to other things or fissions by the time that happens. So, I think that's too long a stretch.
Also, see if anyone noticed.
Your table needs to
No, they pushed me over here. Okay. First, these are the comments of Table 5, and that does not necessarily reflect the views of the commission. I had to get that out there. What we did is we broke it down. We're trying to reduce fire deaths. So basically, we have 40% of the fire deaths from smoke alarms when they sounded. So how are we going to do that? We looked at 40% of the fire deaths when smoke alarms sounded, 37% of the fire deaths with no smoke alarm, and 23% of the deaths, 23% of the deaths with no smoke alarms, and 37% of the deaths with no, 37? No, yeah, getting numbers mixed up. Let's go back to the first one. 40% of the fire deaths when the smoke alarm sounded. Basically, why did 40% of the people die in those fires? And I think there we kind of need more data in terms of were those homes up to code in terms of what it is present to NFPA 72, the age of the alarms in those fires where people died, the type of alarms, the power, when they're interconnected, the location of the alarms, nuisances, did they have an escape plan, the type of home, the age of the home. Basically, I think we just need to understand and figure out why 40% of the people still die when a smoke alarm sounded in those instances. Now, for the other one, 37% of the fire deaths from no working smoke alarms.
No alarms. 23% no working, 37% no smoke. No smoke alarms at all.
That's what I said, 37% no smoke alarm.
No smoke alarm present.
Okay. It's hard up here with Marty sitting right there, With no, I'll just say fire deaths with no smoke alarm. So basically, we're looking at that as maybe use incentives, rewards, obviously education on that. These are people who have no smoke alarms. How do we get smoke alarms in their homes? Awareness, obviously keep going with the installation programs and using news media, especially where we talked about earlier, where in a community where there was a fire and a whole family may have died, that's the opportunity for the fire services to get out there and actually hit that neighborhood and actually get smoke alarms in. There's one interesting thing someone mentioned there about when these fire service goes out to put smoke alarms, how do they decide what to put out in terms of, do they only hit every level, or did you try to hit every level in every bedroom? What are the cost benefits, basically? Is it better just to hit every bedroom, every level, and you leave out 200 homes unprotected? Or is it better to hit every level and get those 200 homes? Maybe if there was some kind of software, someone does a cost-benefit analysis to try and figure out what's my biggest payoff if I do these different things. It could be like this, web thing, you plug in the numbers and see what you come up with in the end. Now, the last one is fire deaths with no working smoke alarms. Basically, why are these smoke alarms not working in people's homes? Obviously, there's the data where people take out the batteries or disconnect it because of nuisances. But what about the ones where battery failures from lithium batteries, failed components? Do we really understand if there's components actually failing in these smoke alarms that's causing these smoke alarms not to work, even if there was a battery in it or when there is a battery? The age of the smoke alarms, the sensitivity over time. Oh, the transients. Basically, there's concern when these AC power smoke alarms are connected to house power, they get hit with transients, and basically it causes some of these smoke alarms not to work. So a lot of this is just more data, more information that we need to try to answer some of these fire deaths. Now, for the long term, we looked at basically just a basic wish list in terms of if we can make a 10-year smoke alarm, interconnected, multi-criteria with end of life that costs $5. Long term, that's what we want. Make the smoke alarms intertwined with everything we do today. So many of our stuff in terms of our phones, our computers, what we do in our lives are intertwined with the technology we use. Smoke alarms is not part of that. We have everything intertwined in this circle of stuff that we do every day, but smoke alarms are outside that circle, basically. How do we bring that inside? Can we use technology to bring that inside so it's better that way? I mean, Nest is on the track for that in terms of getting it on your phone. You could do stuff on your phone to be able to check your smoke alarm. And one of the key things is, basically, if we can make a not necessarily no maintenance smoke alarm, but maybe a smoke alarm in the future where it actually self-checks itself. It kind of takes the human aspects out of that, where a person would have to do that. Would be, I think, solve a lot of the problems in terms of letting the person know when a smoke alarm has stopped operating, and that way, because it does the self-check every so often. That's it.
Andrea.
Are you going to sing Kumbaya?
We're going to sing Kumbaya, yes, that's exactly right. I'd just like to thank everyone for allowing me to be here. It was an amazing experience. I learned a great deal. What an august group, seriously. And Jim, thank you so much for the opportunity just to be here. We opened up by talking about the story of the 7 children who perished in Brooklyn. And I think that's an important story. But it's interesting, our reactions to failure. The larger the event, the bigger the reaction. But last night, as I was laying in bed before I went to sleep last night, I was watching the local news. And in Baltimore yesterday, a 4-year-old girl lost her life. And do we need to have catastrophes of 7 or 9 or 45 or to motivate us? And I think, no. You know, fire maims people and kills people indiscriminately. And we talk about deaths, but we really didn't even talk about the people whose lives are catastrophically altered by horrific injury and go through a life of torture and pain. So what you're doing here is really important work. In my line of work, we'd call it God's work, just because I'm a religious zealot, which I guess is against the law today. I don't know. Come get me for that, too. I'm a libertarian, so I got 2 strikes against me. I don't like the government. But anyway, thank you so much. Let's not wait for catastrophe. Let's keep going. You guys are wonderful.
Well, I'll be brief. That's a hard act to follow. It's such an honor to have met you and worked with you today, Bobby. And it's just wonderful to have met so many of you and have been able to share in all your wisdom. And we're looking forward to moving forward in a partnership with Vision 2020. And we thank you very much for having come to us as an academic partner, and I hope that we'll continue to have many more successful ventures together. And also have to thank FEMA funding, and we really appreciate all of that you made today possible. So thank you very much. And then very last, I just wanted to say during the break, we put a couple of more things out because we thought you needed some more paper today. We gave you a summary of our fire and burn prevention work. So if there's anything there that we're doing at the center that's of interest, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you more about it. And then lastly, our Summer Institute on Injury Prevention, which we offer to practitioners from around the country. So if anyone's interested in that, registration is still open. So again, thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing you again real soon.
I want to thank Maggie for being here. The AFG funding is critical to getting things like this started. That'll make sense in hopefully just a second. To Johns Hopkins again for all of the prep work done, and more importantly, the work that happens starting now. So Bobby, thank you from the heart. It was really, it's an emotional thing when you've got somebody from the fire service who obviously feels as strongly as they do, who's willing to get involved in these circles. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you all for doing this, because the critical piece is, where do we go from here? So I'm sitting there thinking, as everybody's reporting out of Rocky and Bullwinkle, and somehow Rocky watched me pull a rabbit out of my hat. How are you going to combine all of this stuff? Trust me, we are. We've got a lot of great ideas that there are commonalities in some of the themes about gaps in data that need to be resolved, and short-term and mid-term and long-term. I got them. We have a team that's going to continue to work on the next steps, but I guarantee you it's not going to be done right away. So let me end. In addition to thanking you for taking your valuable time here, we're going to be putting out report for review. You'll have an opportunity to comment. There'll be a small group working on refining things so that you actually have something to look at, but the work doesn't stop then, it begins. So by show of hands, how many people here are willing to continue to be advocates for working smoke alarms in the U.S.? Then we'll keep working and chipping away in that direction. Thank you all. Appreciate your time and your effort. Safe travels. Remember to put the toilet seat down. It was a joke. You don't get any better than that. Thank you for your time.